Greg Stanley. I'm here with Wes Warren, Whitehall Management. We'd like to talk about a problem today that we're seeing more and more. One of the hallmarks of a Whitehall office, yes, it probably has a bonus, but whether it does or not, it certainly has leaders. People have been set up to lead hygiene, the front desk, assistants. It has leaders. And they're supposed to be managing these people and managing the patient experience. But the problem is we're seeing these people drawn away from leadership back into full-time production, and there are no leaders.
It's a problem that since COVID, since we've had such turnover, Greg, in our offices, very few people are well trained. A lot of these people are new to dentistry even, and B, they don't know your systems, nothing. And so the leaders are been sucked back into actually working. And I would argue that most people fail with leaders in a practice, mainly because they never shift out of that mode. Most often when we look at practices, the leader in the practice is just doing treatment coordination. They're handling the bills, paying the bills, submitting insurance, and just and then running around putting out fires. They're not really managing through people. And the problem is naturally most people, especially in dentistry, they want to feel productive and doing stuff, physically doing stuff. And so it's very hard for them to shift gears and do stuff through other people and literally sit there and do nothing and just tell people what to do. A manager is, I always say this, is hated mainly in the world, mainly because the workers see them as doing nothing. And our people that we work with really struggle with this, shifting gears and really working through other people and not just doing kind of the higher end jobs in the office. It's a big problem. And you should have a goal for your leader to really only be working in the practice 30 or 40% of the time, really depending on the size of your practice. So if you got a small practice, less than 7 employees, yeah, they're going to be, 70% doing the work, checking people in, answering the phone, kind of doing stuff. But as the practice expands and you get to 14, 15 employees in the practice, you ought to see your main leader really spending around 70% of their time in active management. This would be training. This would be setting up trainings. This would be hiring, disciplining, and looking at the numbers, looking at the practice as far as how many new patients we've got. Are we down? Do we need to market more? Do we need to pull production from the future to now? Kind of really pulling the levers of the practice to make sure it hits its goals, all that kind of good stuff. Tracking, really managing the practice is what they should be doing. And we just don't see that very often with most practices. This is the hat that the owner doctor really does wear. And they can be very frustrated because nobody else does that. Nobody else sees problems before he or she sees them. And really, it just boils down to your leader is just a doer. They really haven't shifted the gear into real leadership.
If you haven't established a bonus system for the office and one especially for the leaders, you have to keep in mind that one of the leaders' biggest rewards is being the best at what they're doing and having it be clear they're the great one. They're wonderful. And so to ask them to develop these traits in other people, it's kind of like giving away the one thing they get rewarded for, is being awesome. And so that's why you want some kind of bonus or incentive backed up by something punitive, meaning you're expected to hit these numbers. There's a bonus if you do. If you don't, we need to have you explain what happened. And after explaining that once or twice, we have to consider other options. So often, I think one of the worst ones we see is we have this person who can collect money like no one collects money. Big case, bigger case, monster case. She's who we throw the cases to. And she's so good at it, she almost doesn't know where to start teaching it, for one thing.
Yeah.
Second, it makes her completely indispensable in the office. We can't do without her. And third, it would take up valuable time on her part to try to train somebody up on this. And maybe we've been hiring for warm bodies and we're going to try to turn a great collector out of that group. There's a lot of things to consider going forward. So each of you are probably hearing this starting at a different point along the path.
Yeah, definitely. And finding somebody that's capable in managing people is different than finding somebody who's really good at something. Never forget that. Just because somebody is really, you're like your best assistant, or they're the best at treatment coordination, doesn't mean they're going to be the best at really managing and managing people and holding people accountable and looking at statistics and coming up with strategies and fixing problems, and then putting in systems in place so the problems don't ever happen again, and holding people accountable to those systems. That doesn't mean that they're going to be good at that position. It's a totally different skill set.
I want to talk about that. First, though, we all do love patients to come in one after another asking for a certain person. They love that. Oh, no one can understand me, no one can help me but this person. One of the ways we look to see if their skill set does include training up others is when a leader, like the clinic administrator, leaves and we have to ascend somebody to the throne. This person is going to be the new leader. If nobody has been developed, or let's say we have one that is, and she goes up and becomes a clinic administrator, but the 8 people under her, none of them could take her job. They were hired and left underdeveloped the whole time she was there.
Another way to spot this is when your main person leaves, takes a vacation, so they're out for a week. Is it just a disaster? Does everything go on hold and like we stop collecting money and we just wait for her to get back? Does the practice fall apart? Do the days fall apart? Those are classic signs of somebody just doing and not really training and not bringing other people up. And you'll never really hit the next level in your practice that you're wanting to hit without having more people with capabilities of understanding how the practice grows and how we maintain our numbers and how we fill the schedule, all that stuff. If it's just kind of one person, the main person doing all that, you'll hit a bottleneck, meaning this person can only see so many people and only see so many people effectively. And once you've reached that, you've plateaued, and you'll plateau for years if you don't make this switch.
One of the drawbacks, of course, is that the patients have a tendency to give one unified response when they're shown treatment, and that is what we call a standing no, not now, maybe later, the be-backs, as they say in sales. It's a be-back. Staff who are really good at this know that somebody telling you no isn't really no, it's let's just figure out how to do this. And so an underdeveloped staff person will take no for an answer, whereas a highly developed, highly motivated, skilled staff person wades in and figures out how it can get done. They still can't make a patient leave their home and come to the office, but they can figure out how it can be done.
One of the other mistakes that we see common in practices is that if you're slightly understaffed, meaning you don't quite have enough people to do the job, this person who could be a great manager and really take the practice up to the next level is just bogged down having to actually do the work. And it could be because you're one staff person short. We see that all the time as well, where you're kind of trying to obviously save a little bit without having to pay an extra person. But at the same time, you're shooting your manager in the foot in being able to have the time to develop a whole team of people to really take the practice forward. And you get just stuck, and there's no way out. You can't, like, after listening to this, you can't go to her and say, hey, you need to spend 70% of your time managing. when there's not enough people to do the job, she has no choice but to just do the work because you're slightly understaffed. So don't make that mistake. If you really feel like that you have underdeveloped team members, problems holding people accountable, systems, checklists aren't being followed, just kind of the simple basics are just being not done, and your leader is bogged down doing the work, just simply going to her and saying, hey, you need to spend more time training. She can't if you're slightly understaffed. So identify the problem. So it's either you're understaffed or your leader just can't give up, the job of, like you said, being the great one. And you have to figure out which one it is and try to solve it.
One of the things we talk about them managing, among other things, is the patient's experience in the practice. Is it a good experience? Is it a bad experience? One thing that makes it a bad experience is if they get left too long and literally forgotten about, till you find patients walking around the halls, they've left the chair, and they're trying to find somebody to tell them what happens next in treatment. And you can laugh at that, but we have offices where that happens until the leadership gets tied down really tight. This thought that you can afford to have people wear the worker hat only, the leadership thing is like frosting on the cake. Not true, man. It's the cake.
Yeah, it's the thing that propels the practice forward.
Right.
There are some general rules of leadership, certainly in the business world, we talk about this, but for every 7 employees, you need 1 manager. That's pretty consistent in business. In dentistry, we violate that. And when I say manager, they're not doing any of the work. They're just managing the 7 employees, evaluating how productive they are, holding them accountable, and then of course sourcing and trying to find new employees. We violate this horribly in dentistry.
I'll give you an example, Wes. We had a practice with about 35 staff, and they had about 10 people in each department, and plus the doctors. And there was 1 full-time person, even in hygiene. I mean, she's a hygienist. She's full-time, she's not doing hygiene. And these people each had somebody probably fulfilling more of what you were saying about spending about 30% of their time assisting them. So they had helpers. There was a second in command in each department. So when these office, and you might need to know too, that the reason these offices got this big is because they managed that well. And I might say too, that later on, when somebody new was called for at the top, the people that had prepared their replacement on the downline side of the leadership roles, hygiene, front desk, assistants, the ones that had somebody ready to take their place made great leaders. The ones that didn't have somebody ready, they had held on to the idea, as you said, of being the great one. I want to be the only one out of these 10 people that can collect money or
assist with the doctor, right? Yeah, the doctor always wants me, and everybody else is just,
chop liver.
Yeah, just not capable of assisting the doctor. These are all bad signs. So if you're noticing in your practice anything like that, where you have like 1 or 2 A players and everybody else just never comes up to speed, there's a little bit of a revolving door. You have some basic checklists and systems, and you ask, are you following it? And they kind of look at you like, what are you talking about? What checklist? Oh, that thing? These are bad signs, and it means undermanaged. If the patient experience, like Greg, you were talking about this, where people are left waiting or people aren't being checked in and moved back fast enough, and if the schedule is not managed for production, meaning there's a hole that pops open and they kind of go, I didn't know we were supposed to fill that, that kind of stuff, or the schedule tightened to open up room for a bigger procedure, stuff like that, common stuff that we would expect people to know to do, but they just kind of, oh, I didn't know you want me to do that. And you told them, yeah, I want you to do that. And then they do it for a week or 2, and then a month later they stop. That kind of stuff, these are all symptoms of being undermanaged. And you're gonna bogged down until you fix this. There's just no question about it.
A lot of people call and they'll say, I heard you on your website, or I heard somebody on your mastermind talk about having 200 people, 200 new patients a month, or producing 500 or 600,000 a month. How is that possible? And they, in other words, we just broke contact with their credibility. They can't believe what we're saying or what the other person is saying. And it comes down to this. It's as simple. They have cloned themselves, so to speak. They have people managing. They have everybody motivated, some kind of bonus. Everybody's working together as a machine. We like to use the word team, but I don't know about that sometimes. It's more like a machine. And they make sure the patient has a great experience, make sure the patient gets all their work done that they're ready to get done. And they do all these things. And the people that stand on the sidelines say, well, that's what I want. And we say, okay, let's get a leader. Well, I'm not ready for that. I don't have anybody that could be a leader. You know what I mean? In other words, they push back.
One thing I'll say that we used to do those boot camps, Greg, all the time, where doctors brought their whole teams to Phoenix, and we would have hundreds of offices there, and you'd bring them up on stage, the teams. One thing that was very common, and very quickly you pick this out, smaller practices, they bring their team up, and doctors would grill them and ask them questions how they do things and stuff and what their production is. And their team was kind of unimpressive and mediocre, to say the least. But the practices that were really hitting big numbers and really doing well and hitting numbers, like you said, they're unbelievable. And they'd bring up their staff of 20 people, 25 people, and the doctors would grill the team members, and you'd just sit back and go, wow, these are all sharp people. And I remember doctors constantly come up to me, I'd love to hire half of those people. I'd hire her. If I had that team, I mean, I would, it was evident that the team is the difference. You have to put together a good team, and you have to create that culture that nurtures them. And part of it's leadership, part of it's bonus. There's other aspects of it. We're touching on the leadership side of it right now, but without getting your team really fired up, I've rarely seen a doctor take a practice to the kind of levels that you're talking about without it.
I saw one in Texas, not somebody y'all know, but I almost felt sorry for him. He literally was on his headset managing every aspect of this huge practice. Okay, get that patient, go out in the parking lot, get that patient, bring him back. Okay, go do this, go do that.
He'd tell him tell her this, we'll drop it 10%. It was crazy the amount of management he was doing. And he would be drilling and then pull back and like in his ear, pull out the walkie. It was really amazing.
Yeah, it was almost sad. It was so bad. So hopefully somebody's gotten something out of this. You got to start somewhere. Remember, in the end, we got to have a bonus in place, a reason to go forward, leadership to manage, or you're managing. And it's hard to get a team of associates that can treat like you do. It takes 3 of them typically to produce like you do. So let's get this started and go forward. If you have questions, get in touch with Wes and I. We'll get your wheels on the tracks. We'll go forward.
Yeah, if you're having troubles with this and can't figure out, do I have a good leader or a bad leader, or is it me, or am I having to do too much? Talk with us. There's a link to do a consultation with us, no charge. We're glad to kind of walk you through it and see, what your problem is.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks for listening.